weekend to celebrate the 10th anniversary of V-Day, the global movement to combat violence against women and children. V-Day began a decade ago when playwright and activist Eve Ensler held the first benefit performance of her award-winning play, The Vagina Monologues. This weekend, Eve Ensler is organizing a two-day celebration at the Superdome called V to the 10th. It's called V to the 10th. Its focus is on helping the women of New Orleans and the Gulf South. Today we speak with activists from New Orleans, from Kenya and Iraq, who are here for the V-Day celebrations. But we'll start with Eve Ensler herself, the author of the Vagina Monologues and the key organizer behind V-Day.
Well, we went down to New Orleans right after the flood. We were invited down there by women on the ground who were, at shelters and hotlines, and the whole infrastructure, of course, was gone. So we went to see what we could do, which is what we do. We don't kind of have interventionist politics. People invite us, or they do what they do, and we support it. And we did this amazing evening of storytelling, and we kind of launched this idea of this Katrina warrior network of women, and about 900 women showed up. And it launched this community and network of women. And we were down there at the same time trying to determine where our 10th anniversary was going to be, and we thought maybe Nairobi, maybe Paris, and then it was like, no, this needs to be at the Superdome. We need to take back the Superdome. We need to reclaim and turn it into super love. And what was fabulous about it is that at the same time we were launching a spotlight on conflict zones last year. And New Orleans is clearly a conflict zone. It has all the ingredients of a conflict zone: a failed state, the desecration of one section of the population, loss of control in the central government. We can go on. And so we began to look at it like that and began to see the impact of what happens when there is a failed state, when in this country people don't show up, and there's that kind of profound neglect and abandonment, particularly looking at women, because women have carried New Orleans and the Gulf South since the storm. And I know you all have spent a lot of time there and covered it in an incredible way since the flood, but I'm there almost every month in some way, and people don't know what's going on there. People don't know that we have tent cities there. People don't know that the mental health rates and the suicide rates are out of control. People don't know that people who lived in houses that were once $400 are now $1,200. People don't know that people are being charged for fuel adjustment, this new term, and they don't even have a meter, the gas meter in their house. I mean, it's a bizarre, I think, really immoral and profound statement about where the U.S. is.
And, of course, the reports recently of all the formaldehyde problems with the trailers and the poisoning. And the poisoning
and everybody becoming sick. There's a piece I just wrote for Oprah where I call it femaldehyde, which is kind of this new creation made by our very own failed government. But I think what we're saying is that we need to bring women from this country and all over the world to show up for our sisters in the South.
And what is the special burden you feel the women of New Orleans bear?
Well, I think if we can look at all the pieces of it, we kind of look at the whole story of what needs to change for women everywhere. But there's the burden of racism. There's the economic inequalities. There's the burden of a failed education system there. So where are children going to school, and where it has just been designated the murder capital of America. So we're talking about one of the highest violence rate in America. We're talking about communities where taxi drivers wouldn't even bring me to go. I don't have a car because they were too scared to go into the community, and people are living there. We're talking about, I think women particularly are on the front lines because they are dealing with children, they are dealing with husbands who have no work, they are dealing with how to put food on the table, they are dealing with all the kind of nurturing, moving the community forward aspects, and everybody's traumatized. We're talking about a seriously traumatized population. So you got trauma. We did a brunch there recently for the women in the Gulf South, Mississippi, Alabama, the grassroots activists, fabulous women who've just been working 24 hours a day. And we just gave them a brunch. Women were standing up and weeping, talking about the fact that no one had ever given them a brunch. I thought, a brunch? This is what we're grateful for, a brunch? And I think, so part of it is, how do we bring people from all over the U.S. and say, we care about the women in New Orleans. We're going to be giving free massages, free medical exams, free yoga and meditation, all free for the women. And women from all over the country are volunteering. And then we're going to do a performance of the Vagina Monologues with performers from New Orleans. You know, Charmaine Neville's performing, and there'll be gospel choirs. And it's going to be the biggest mega event we've ever done at the New Orleans Superdome, at the arena.
Explain what the Vagina Monologues are for people who don't understand. I'm sitting with two of your books. One is the Vagina Monologues, featuring 5 never-before-published V-Day monologues, and the other, Insecure at Last, a political memoir that you wrote.
Well, the Vagina Monologues grew out of interviews that I did with about over 200 women, where I took little pieces and strains of their stories and created literary theater texts that are really talking about the sexuality of women. The story of women is filtered through their vaginas and the story of their vaginas. And so it ranges from very orgasmic pleasure to very shattering stories that were based on the women in Bosnia who were raped during the war. And I think it goes from celebration to sorrow to happiness but looking at how, if we tell our stories through the kind of biography of our vagina, and it was just amazing to me how many women needed to talk about it and still do.
That was Eve Ensler, interviewed in New York in February. Well, now we're here in New Orleans, and the V-Day celebration is taking place today and tomorrow, culminating in a major event on Saturday night. We're joined right now by 2 people involved with the V-Day celebration. Colette Pichon-Battle is with the Gulf Coast coordinator for Oxfam America, founder of the group Moving Forward Gulf Coast. She's a native of Slidell, Louisiana, and comes from one of the oldest French Creole families in South Louisiana. Carol Babel is the executive director of the Ashe Cultural Arts Center, a native of New Orleans, and a published poet and writer. We welcome you both to Democracy Now!
Thank you so much.
Carol, talk about the significance of this event. Thousands of people coming in from all over the country, though there may be a few fewer, with American Airlines canceling, what, more than 1,000 flights?
Absolutely. Well, for us, I mean, I start where Eve started, which is that she was out in the world working on violence against women, and the end of August 2005 happened, and she turned around, and many of the faces that she saw in water, and many of the were girls and women. And she began to think about what was it that V-Day ought to be doing. They came to do humanitarian work, and then with the 10th anniversary coming up, she said she thought that it was really important to come back and stand here with the women of New Orleans, because when systems stop working in society, because women are at the center of everything, they get the brunt of the problem. And so the institutions shut down, and women in their physical vulnerability, being the carriers of children, being the caretakers of the family, the nurturers, etc. When those systems go away, they're just kind of left out there on their own. And so the violence that we see here is really, it's more subtle. It doesn't leave bruises, but what it does is it winds up essentially rendering women helpless inside of the place where they should be the most powerful. And so the institutions are not there. They're not there for the children. They're not there for the women. And it's kind of counterintuitive to not take care of women, with women being as important to the life of a society as they are.
Were you here during Hurricane Katrina?
This was the first time in my life that I ever evacuated. And so I went off, and I left that Sunday, and to my obvious horror, discovered what happened after my exit.
And your community, how hard hit was it?
Well, I live in the uptown area, so I'm close to the Sliver by the river. So my personal home was not, we didn't have problems. In Central City, which is where I work, and I spend most of my time, half of that community was flooded. And it's a renting community, and so the people are not as easily able to come back home because they don't have land that ties them to New Orleans, and so they're left to the devices of government in terms of getting rental properties, helping to get rental properties up, and landlords, in terms of the rents. and how expensive they are.
Colette, housing is certainly an issue that you have worked on. Talk about the situation today here in New Orleans.
Yeah, well, moving forward, Gulf Coast is bringing 1,200 women back to the region for V-Day. And one of the things we discovered as we've been reaching out to women in at least 8 different cities, diaspora cities, is that a lot of the women want to come back, but as Ms. Carroll just said, many are part of the rental population, and there just is no way for them to come back right now. So we are proud and sad that what we're able to provide for this one weekend is actually what most of these women need in a more long-term way.
And where are they based?
These women are based out of Houston, Atlanta, Dallas, Little Rock, Memphis, Jackson, Baton Rouge.
But they come from New Orleans.
Many of them come from New Orleans. They include rural Louisiana, which is often not talked about, but took a hard hit of